And welcome back. And of course, continuing with our Women's Day focus on the achievements made by so many young women and of course, not so young women in South Africa as we all celebrate Women's Month. As South Africa continues to celebrate, Morning Live is also highlighting the remarkable roles and also achievements by different women in our country. And this morning, we profile two young women who are change makers in their own spaces. Zulaikha Patel is a 20-year-old activist, a best-selling author, international speaker, and founder of Dare to Change non-profit organization. And in studio with me is Khethiwe Sibanyoni, who's a 22-year-old social entrepreneur with a passion for helping women and victims of gender-based violence. And Zulaikha joining us virtually, as I said, Khethiwe in studio. Ladies, thank you so much to both of you for joining us this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I first want to start off with, hearing from both of you. And Khethiwe, let me start with you. In terms of Women Month, what we see, what we do as South African women, what does it mean to you and where do you think we could do better?
Well, good morning and hello to all your viewers. For me, as a woman, as a young woman specifically, I believe that there's so much more that we can do as young people. I think we're led well by the women that come before us, but we have a huge responsibility to be the people that are the pioneers of the change that we want to see, especially in the gender-based violence space. I believe that, yes, we've seen the plans. Previously, you were discussing the plans that government have put in place, but those plans aren't actually coming into fruition because the communities that need these plans to be activated have young people in there that need to stand up and make the change happen.
And of course, it's difficult to have your voice heard. You did make your voice heard, though, Zulaikha. And yesterday, I thought of you when social media was abuzz again about hair and locks. I was saying this morning, I refuse to call them dreadlocks. They are hair locks. And again, some of the same conversations keep coming up time and again.
Mm-hmm. Apologies, could you just say that again for me one more time?
Okay, we do seem to be having a problem with bandwidth in our connection to Zulaikha. Zulaikha, I was talking about the recurring problems. You obviously came to prominence fighting for your rights in terms of being able to wear your natural hair as it is. And yesterday we saw a similar incident coming up again on social media. So it seems as though some of the themes are recurring. I believe we did lose Zulaikha Patel there. But of course, Khethiwe, just as well that you're here in studio with me because sometimes technology lets us down. But, the hair debate. And unlike so many, or rather like so many other topics, we seem to be covering the same ground time and time again. What are your thoughts on some of these topical discussions that we focus on during Women's Month?
I definitely believe that I love to see controversial issues being continuously discussed because I believe in hearing the voices and perspectives of multiple people. But with that, equally so, I believe that we have a responsibility that when we are taught something, we have the responsibility to unlearn things that we've been consciously indoctrinated with. So stuff like the hair debate, stuff like whether or not a woman invites rape because of how she's dressed. All these issues that we always discuss is like you could have that perspective, but when you are taught something and you have been corrected on something, then we have a responsibility to unlearn. But navigating that new narrative, what does that actually mean?
And that's important. So we went through the whole COVID-19 pandemic and the disruption that came along with that. And it's always, difficult to grasp, but during difficult times, it also presents opportunities. And during that time, you started Khethiwe's Foundation.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and, the work that you do.
Khethiwe's Foundation is what started as a passion project. I used to volunteer for a gender-based violence organization, I think from grade 6. And as I continuously heard the news during the hard lockdown, I was hearing the president speak about the stats and how increasingly significant. And I said to myself, okay, let me call back that shelter that I used to work with and find out what they're doing. First thing I heard from them is that we've been told to shut down, some funds, some subsidies are being cut, we're struggling to sustain the shelter, etc. And so I said, what can I do in my personal capacity to ensure that we can assist gender-based violence victims? And then that's when I started what I called it then is #helping GBV survivors. So essentially we're trying to pack these comfort bags, which I believed was the therapy we could give from a distance. And with those bags, we pack the basic toiletry, stationery, COVID protective equipment, all of those stuff. And essentially we providing economic relief to these shelters, ensuring that they continue and they're continuously sustained, but also continuously allow victims to come in. So how could we chip in? And that has now transformed into this foundation that is now in the broader spectrum of gender-based violence as an ecosystem, trying to figure out how we can prevent, detect, and correct gender-based violence in South Africa.
And we just had a conversation before you guys came in with Advocate Madumise Pajibo about the funds, among other things, that had been pledged and promised for these initiatives around gender-based violence. As someone in the space, have you benefited from that?
From government, I have not benefited from any type of funding in that regard, but I have benefited from private entities and other foundations that are bigger than me. I'm primarily funded by the Khaleesi Foundation, and Rachel and Sia have been a huge support in ensuring that we drive the change we want to see in Gauteng, as they are primarily situated in Cape Town. So it's unfortunate that we haven't received those pledges or we haven't seen them realized. But I want that to, in the same breath, to say that that does not, we don't get to be discouraged by the fact that we haven't received. There's so much more we can do as we wait in anticipation for those funds to be realized. And whether or not they eventually come to us, that shouldn't stop the work that still needs to be done, because every single minute a victim suffers from gender-based violence.
Indeed. And of course, we will not be deterred. Zulaikha Patel, we've managed to get her on the telephone. So Zulaikha, welcome back. And, I was talking to you about your activism, and you've branched out. You've done so much more since you first came to prominence. But as I was saying, I thought about you again yesterday when once again we saw the story of a learner who refused the instruction by a school principal to have her hair shaved off. And I was saying, it seems as though we go around in circles sometimes with these debates that we have.
Thank you so much for having me and bearing with my connectivity. I think that given what's been making rounds on social media, as well as a couple of news platforms, I think it goes to show that in our country we struggle with one of our biggest problems being accountability, and we struggle with accountability with holding our leaders accountable on the things they say they're going to implement, having accountability structures to keep institutions in check and keep institutions accountable to ensuring that they provide an environment that is decolonized, safe, and inclusive for all learners. We have no accountability structures to ensure that all institutions are in line with upholding a certain standard, and we struggle to hold people that have perpetuated acts of violence on other people accountable. And looking at what happened, I think it was about a week ago or a couple of days ago, it goes to show that we don't have accountability structures towards racism in this country. We treat our country as such as it's one where racism was buried in 1994, but that isn't the reality of our country. The reality of our country is that harsh consequences of racism, harsh institutionalized and systemic racism have continued, and the remnants of the apartheid system are still largely felt in this country by the black majority, and we have no accountability structures, and the work of the TRC is not complete. We need further accountability structures to ensure that all institutions of learning in this country uphold a certain standard, an anti-racist, decolonized standard and environment that is inclusive for all learners. And if they cannot uphold that standard, they should not be allowed to operate in this country. And we struggle to hold individuals who perpetuate violence onto other people in this country accountable. Educators such as those that assaulted that learner should actually be placed on a blacklist where they're not allowed to ever be employable in any institution in this country because they're not safe around children because of the violence that they perpetuated onto that one child. And so I think that this is also linked to the crisis that we have with gender-based violence in this country, is that we have no accountability structures to ensure that we hold government accountable, to ensure that the funding measures that they say they're going to put out for NGOs and civil society working in the space of gender-based violence are continuously rolled out to ensure that we don't have shelters forcefully having to close down, and accountability structures for people who have perpetuated violence, for perpetrators. We don't have that in our country. And I think that our biggest problem, if we can solve the accountability problem in our country, I think that we can solve many issues in our country.
Zulaikha, Khethiwe, we've run out of time, but as I said to Advocate Matubise Pajibo, I think we need to convene a round table here at Morning Live and perhaps bring the two of you in as, young women talking about the different struggles, the activism, the lack of accountability, the lack of access to funding, as some of the issues that you have raised during that discussion. But for now, we're going to have to park it. Zulaikha Patel, 20-year-old activist, best-selling author, international speaker, founder of the Dare to Change non-profit organization, and in studio with me, Khethiwe Sibanyoni, 22 years old. She's a social entrepreneur, a passion for helping women and victims of gender-based violence, and they were talking to us about the good work that they are doing as young women and what still needs to be done.